The following video has been inspired by somebody who is threatening to denigrate me publicly by making false claims against me. Yeah, it's lather, rinse, and repeat from 2014 of a person who eventually went to prison for what he accused me of. One of several, effectively. But anyway, let's move on. These are going to be general rules you have to follow if you want to be considered to be a person who's worthy of debating. And this sounds like I'm talking down to people, and I am. I'm not even going to try to cover it up. But more importantly, it's impossible to say these things without sounding like you're, talking down to somebody. I'm going to bring up my new favorite example. Someone claiming that they're a hacker and that they can break into your computer and see shared folders, which you don't have. And they're running a program on their cell phone because apparently they don't know they can just skip it and go straight to the command line under Android. Or get a better Android routine, or just jailbreak the damn thing, or why don't you just rewrite this? I mean, seriously, write your own apps. But anyway, someone claiming I'm running an app and it gives me access to your shared folder, which does not exist, and we've seen evidence on your computer that's incriminating, because this person is threatening to make these kind of claims and go after me and create an internet drama, and uses a supposed command line invoking the name of a program that's an app you can get for your Linux, a Linux-like app for your Android device. There's dozens like this that would allow the person to do something, and then they type out a command prompt that's supposed to look scary, but when you look it up, you find out it's the command prompt to install something from a repository on their own computer that would only affect their computer. It's not a command line like FTP, something dark side, some IP address, :80. That's port 80, by the way. Password and login embedded in the string, accessing root directory through your computer running web services to access your unprotected web service thing because you may not know it's running, and trying to gain access to not your folder, but to the public folder for a limited user account. Now, if you understand exactly what I said, you understand why that really wouldn't have any effect on them unless they really didn't have security enabled. By the way, on a Windows machine, that's literally what would work. You don't go for the root access. You go for a limited user account to test to see if it works. The limited user account, if you're not aware of it, will not record anything most times of anybody attempting to break into the computer, so you go after the limited user account, which is by default if it exists. And in some systems it did, on Dell specifically. It said limited user. That's literally what it was called. Placeholder. So, me saying that, me explaining that, is that a threat to you by me saying that that's something that you could look up, learn about, and see if I'm completely wrong about? And I probably bungled it a lot, and I probably got it wrong, and I'm admitting it. Versus someone saying, I'm going to run this routine that amounts to invoke command and then doesn't complete it. And it's running, the person's claiming that they're running a program on their cell phone that doesn't do what they think it does. And they're implying that they found information on your computer and on a shared folder. And these are words you can look up on the internet, and it sounds really cool, but it's not the same as finding out that it's the limited user account, a default placeholder account created by a company that makes computers and sells them in mass, like Dell or Apple or whatever. On Windows machines, this is actually a real problem. So I disable it immediately after I install the operating system. I don't even know how long ago I did this. And I check every once in a while to make sure it's not enabled again, because that's one of the first signs your machine's been broken into, if it's a specific malware or virus. Now, I can explain that, and most of you actually understood what I said. I'm not trying to be cryptic. I'm just explaining in ordinary speech. And in the process, I'm going to be saying things that are not absolutely accurate, because that's not necessary. What's necessary is, if you care about this, you can go look it up. And I may or may not include links for this. But the point is, someone saying, I found something really interesting on your shared folder, and their images, and I think you should be careful with those, and then saying nothing is ever deleted. And then quoting back a magical incantation that does nothing because they didn't finish their magic words. Okay, first example of debating conspiracy theorists, implying and trying to avoid getting flagged for that they're going to harass you, harm you, damage your reputation, or say things about you that aren't true. Trying to get a reaction out of you, and this is also part of cold reading you, trying to see what you'll respond to. I'm more offended by this fucker saying that I would have a shared folder on my computer. And that immediately tells me this is a script kiddie who doesn't know what they're talking about. Okay? All right. And yes, this is the person who inspired it. Now, the person then says, I have to debunk every video on their channel when it's about hundreds of different subjects that would require specialized knowledge, which, oddly enough, I do have and I'm able to do. But I've already done that by posting videos that explain why they're simply wrong about something, and that people who propose that those things are impossible to debunk are lying because it's been debunked a billion times. So this person became upset, and hence the implied threat that they're going to damage my reputation by claiming I have something like, in my example I gave, they're implying I have goat clown porn on my computer. Now, and yes, I just invented that, and if that trends, I take full responsibility. No, I don't. I regret nothing, but I admit nothing. But anyway, the rules for dealing with conspiracy theorists have to be different than other people because conspiracy theories are based on people, when you interact with conspiracy theorists, not holding their feet to the fire of reality, sensibility, and sanity. A person yelling chemtrails, for instance, is wanting to be taken not seriously, otherwise they wouldn't say that. What is a chemtrail? Well, it's this conspiracy theory, and there's a crazy wall that comes out and a bunch of stuff, and there's 100 different definitions for what you mean by what you're saying, so you can just shift them around when you're proven wrong. No, what you're talking about is aircraft producing pollution. The claim is that every airplane that produces a contrail is polluting the environment intentionally. So we destroy your ability to have that argument that immediately goes into conspiracy theories and reptilians and your mom. What's your name? I'm not allowing you to do that because you want it dragged into that cesspit. You're claiming that airplane produced pollution. You're making the claim prove that it happens. So inevitably, if you're not aware of it, people bring up things like a study that showed that near an airport there's more pollution than in other places of a particular type. Okay. And then they bring up things that inevitably are either directly associated only with airplanes because there's more pollution out of an engine when it takes off and lands because they dump fuel before they land sometimes, so that pollutes the air and the environment. And also, when they take off, the engine isn't as efficient. It's pushing harder. It's less efficient. It may produce more compounds. Or they say that they've detected things that are normally in the atmosphere or in the dirt anyway. But they claim they're unusual, like aluminum. Aluminum is one of the most common elements. So now we have our hold the feet to the fire. Stop saying chemtrail and say airborne pollution from aircraft, not every car going down the road with an unknown amount of crap in the engine because no one regulates whether or not you have to really do a good job being a mechanic. No, seriously. Any idiot who's 17 can put a fart cannon on their car and there's no law against it. Do you really think that shit isn't just coming out of people's engines? And yeah, that would affect people on the ground more than somebody being 30,000 feet up trying to dump something into the atmosphere, having it disperse all over the planet and not really affect anybody. But okay, here are the rules. You have to acknowledge, confess, agree, and swear on the blood of Christ, or whatever it is that has to be done so you'll stop lying or weaseling, the following. Engine exhaust contains a lot of water vapor, and did also before 1980 and 1990, World War I and World War II. Prop airplanes had to fly high to avoid anti-aircraft fire, and depending on the air pressure, warm engine exhaust mixed with the air that was colder and forms condensation trails. And now to the people who don't believe in contrails being chemtrails, I have to point out something. It doesn't require that it be 40 degrees below zero either. Fog forms in the atmosphere outside your house sometimes. Stop creating fantastically hard conditions for this to happen. A persistent or short-term contrail does not require these things if it happens at ground level, at sea level, in temperatures that are not 40 degrees below zero. By the way, 40 degrees below zero, Fahrenheit and Celsius are apparently the same number. You might want to look that up. Or maybe I'm wrong. And again, if I'm wrong, I'll just say so because I don't care. It's not relevant. The point is, this can happen at higher temperatures. It's based on air pressure and many other things, including humidity. You acknowledge, confess, and agree that the acidity or alkalinity of a solution, or its pH value, the number 7 would be neutral. Drinking water ranges from 6.5 to 8.5, centering around 7, And rain can be as low on the number scale as 5.5. And it's considered to be really bad if it's 5, because it's not a very linear scale. It's based on a really, really weird scaling. You have to acknowledge that before you're allowed to say that chemtrails make the pH change a certain amount. And then it's something very ordinary, like literally 7.1, which means it's more neutral and less reactive, not more. Do you acknowledge, confess, etc.? The smallest amount where you can be 99% sure it's an amount of a substance and not just the machine screwing up is called the method detection limit, sometimes in some paperwork. If a number is below that number, you can't say it was a substance of any kind. It could just be the machine making noise. This also happens if you're doing shotgun tests. If you're testing a shotgun for PSI rating inside of the barrel, and you say there's a significant result, it has to be above the level of a normal shot or below, or show a curve to it. It can't be what looks like an anomalous crackle in the noise. Do you acknowledge that there are several versions of the chemtrails theory's purpose or causes or mechanisms, etc., and you have to stick to one and debate that just one? You can't shift between them, which have mutually exclusive data. You're not allowed to do that. Just because you want to win an argument on the internet doesn't mean you get to win it. You have to acknowledge that you have to be able to lose. And finally, falsifiability is the ability for a theory to be tested and found false. If you make a non-falsifiable theory, that means you're saying something that isn't true. It's false by definition because you're making a claim that can't be tested. Or you're designing it to be that way. If you require that we have a way to scoop up samples from a contrail in the air, which I have proposed or maybe have been involved in something maybe kind of illegal to do that, you then have to agree that there's a control group to test against that has nothing wrong with it, which means you have to get a hold of airplanes that you can test that have no sign of any chemtrails in it. And if they do exactly the same thing as the planes you claim are chemtrails, and that just shows that they're the same thing, you're not allowed to say, well, somebody fiddled with the equipment. You're not allowed to do that. And again, conspiracy theorists never stick to this stuff because they feel regimented, they don't like it. You're just being sciencey. Yeah, that's kind of the point. You have to agree to a control group to test against. This would also need to be created by the theory's proponent and agreed to by them and others. What does that mean? If you're claiming that every airplane in the air, or some of them, produce some sort of horrible compound, you have to come up with a method for doing it, paying for it. Not everybody else on the planet, with more resources, or more accurately, something better to do. You sitting in a basement somewhere, posting comments on the internet, claiming you have proof of something when you've never actually done any of the testing. And then coming to my channel bitching because I participated at one time in a air quality testing process for making sure airplanes weren't polluting the environment excessively. Meanwhile, you also have to admit that adding lead to gasoline was a pollutant. Some of these people, very, very contrarianly, will refuse to do that. They also will respond to anybody saying, you have to admit to a fact as being a threat. Hence the reason for coming to my channel and threatening me with basically denigrating me and harassing me. Do you acknowledge, confess, and agree that looking at things like the amount or concentration of a found substance, if it matches milligrams per liter, it's also parts per million, and is 1,000 times higher than parts per billion, and we must use the right units and acknowledge what they mean. Meanwhile, conspiracy theorists will mix them up because that doesn't give them what they want, so they just lie about them. Calcium, magnesium, titanium, aluminum, all sorts of things are found abundantly in the airborne dust, and have been even before airplanes or even before the Industrial Revolution. You can also find barium because we mine it and process it. Also, burning coal puts it out. You also have to acknowledge that coal burning puts mercury in the atmosphere. You have to acknowledge actual shit that really happens. And if you find this stuff in the atmosphere, blaming it on an airplane versus all the shit that's already happening, not acceptable. Do you acknowledge that any post claiming that any of that crap is somehow unusual or impossible and indicates some foul play must be omitted from the discussion or not? Suddenly there's almost no data to work with, right? Do you acknowledge Doppler radar are designed to detect precipitation and water vapor? They don't indicate that a cloud isn't anything other than a cloud. Same thing with contrails. Going 30,000 feet high in the air to dump your weaponized material so it'll drift in the wind and be diluted by the entire atmosphere of the Earth is not targeting anyone, and the ground much less. Getting as far away from the target as possible to do a better aim. And also, car exhaust would be able to do this better, and you should also check car exhaust, which is really easy, to see what's been put in the air by them instead of airplanes. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. If you can adhere to these rules, we can have a debate. Otherwise, go away.